turn on? There we go. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Happy All Saints Hollow. Okay, roll call, please.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Larson. Here. Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Zwanitzer Dave.
Here.
Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Nethercott.
Here.
Senator Salazar. Here. Co-Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Okay, Don, why don't you walk us through our day?
Mr. Chairman, due to a scheduling change, ETS and CIO Climb are available to discuss the technology replacement program to kick off the day. I think perhaps Director Hibbard might contribute to that as well. Following that, there's the ECA, and then you have a discussion from A&I on employee compensation, a potential break, and then several follow-ups from the 2024 budget. And the afternoon is comprised primarily of statewide gaming and an introduction to interactive data visualization, should you wish to do that.
Okay, sounds good. Mr. Co-Chair?
No, nothing other than we've got a full day and we'll step through it as quickly as we can while still gathering all the information that we do need. But there's quite a bit of business, some that we moved over from yesterday, which was the right thing to do, so that those folks that had young ones that could get out with them trick-or-treating, and that was important to do. But we've pushed some of the work from yesterday to today, so we'll have to move quickly to get it done before 10 p.m.
Okay, Mr. Klein, come on up.
Good morning, Jeff Kleins, and the Director for the ETS, Enterprise Technology Services, State CIO. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for this time. Recognition of the introductions, we'll try to go quickly. The TRP, or Technology Replacement Program, something I came into, been here about a month now, but I'm really excited about this presentation because it's just a hallmark of looking for ways to be more efficient, both with your time and with other agencies' times as we come to present the budget book or to the technology replacement needs of state agencies. I'd like to defer real quick to Director Hibbard to have any comments on the budget side of things, on anything we're doing there, and then I'll go through an overview of the program and how we'll approach it.
Morning, Joint Appropriations Committee. I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the Wyoming State Budget Department.
Kevin, could you pull that just a little bit closer? I'm sorry, or speak.
How's that?
Perfect, thank you.
I'm Kevin Hibbard. I'm the Director of the Wyoming State Budget Department. In May, I presented the new process that will have a TRP budget book. This was in line with the Joint Appropriations Committee's conversations last year that it gets disjointed when we have the IT pieces in each agency's budgets. The funding and the fund distribution of federal, special, and general, that'll all continue to stay in the budgets. The agencies will be able to populate that. That's all stays true. What we do is we bring over this into one budget book where we'll have a conversation with the Joint Appropriations Committee, with ETS and the State Budget Department. Page by page, you'll have all the requests for TRP in one book. You take action on this book, it will then flow back through the process and then ultimately be interfaced to WULS. Another important item on this, you'll see the counts of laptops and computers in this. So we'll be able to facilitate the normal questions. How many computers do you have? Are you replacing, et cetera? So expect to see in the upcoming biennium budget, a new budget 277. It'll look and feel like Capcom 227, but it'll be for you to have one single conversation on TRP with this group of people that you have in front of you now.
All right, so I apologize I did not get the presentation up to you beforehand, but I wanted to give you something that you could refer to every once in a while when you're thinking about this. And so I'll just talk briefly about this and then let you read through it at your own leisure and stuff. But this is really, to me, about efficiency. And the ideal for ETS is to be an aid to all the state agencies who are our customers. So I want to take as much administrative burden off of them as possible by automating things. And technology replacement, replacing desktops and laptops and things as they come end of life, the goal for me is always just if we can automate that so it's not something the agencies have to manage day in and day out, is the efficiency that I'm looking to drive within ETS as well. There's a lot of reasons why outside of efficiencies, cybersecurity, service, things like that. The general program would be we have an inventory, and building a better inventory process or hardware asset management process every day would be as the devices come end of life, then we would be able to reach out to the users and the agencies to say, okay, we're going to replace these at this point in time. I guess just to start at the budget side. So every year we would work with the agencies to say, okay, we need a budget for this many devices that come end of life. And then throughout the year, then we would automate that. It's fascinating to think we have about just over 10,000 endpoints or devices to manage throughout the state. Wow. And if we have a 4-year replacement cycle, it's about 2,500 devices a year that we have to replace. So it's a good number of devices. It's, quite a few a day that have to be replaced to keep on type. So the ideal for me would be able to get this structure in place where we're replacing about 25% of our devices per year. I don't think it's currently there. We're still a little bit behind. We have a lot of devices that are 5+ years old that we'd have to do a bit of catch up. But as we go through this process, we can get into a level thing where we have a consistent number of devices to replace year over year from that way. So we would use that inventory. We would look to do our partner and plan with the agencies like for like devices. This way we'll keep current with patches and manufacturing updates and things to make sure our devices are secure for the end users and for the end user performance. Make sure that their devices are not a hindrance to them completing their jobs and make sure they have the technology they need to be efficient. Doing the TRP also allows us to build more on the procurement efficiencies, looking to do major procurements and look for the volume pricing and things with vendors rather than doing onesie twosies ordering here and there. We can have larger contracts. And then just that leads us to be able to, as we have better inventory and things like that, we're able to manage that deployment and the service, things like that. And so that's a 90,000 foot view level. For sake of time, I will end there and then stand by for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Jeff, this is you and Kevin as well. And so on this TRP program as defined here is desktops, laptops, docking stations, and does not include monitors, printers, and the peripherals. So when monitors, printers, and such need to be replaced, will we see it in this overall budget for TRP, or will that still show up in their individual budgets?
Mr. Chairman, monitors don't need to be replaced at the frequencies of the computer themselves. When we do the monitor replacement, then you will see those requests and printers, et cetera.
In which budget, in the 277?
In the TRP budget 277.
Okay,
Yep.
just trying to get my head what we're going to anticipate seeing. So we're going to see the annual 25% of the things that move through the laptops, desktops, and docking stations, but any additional associated components like the monitors and stuff will also show up in that same budget, but just not on the frequency that the others will. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So yeah, the monitors, if I would replace them every other time or things. Currently, we're not tracking them like we are with the desktops and monitors, so we've got to run before, or we got to walk before we can run. So that is the long-term estimate to have the end user compute things in there as well. So the monitors, the printers be in there as well eventually, Kevin?
Yes, so imagine that the future would look like a TRP request. You'd have a TRP request for a computer. It'll be clear and it'll be counted in our count. And if there's a TRP and we have the second cycle around that the monitor get replaced, we say TRP computer/monitor.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Klein's from a big picture view, you come from South Dakota. Is this the kind of approach South Dakota was using? Because we're a state similar in size, and we created ETS about 12 years ago, and we've struggled to make sure we're doing what is industry best practices and making sure we have quality equipment, but not overdoing or underdoing. So give us a little perspective from your background.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, so in South Dakota, it was a similar structure, but Wyoming's a little bit farther ahead than South Dakota. This was a structure we were working to get to in South Dakota. There it was still very much so agencies, budget, individual, but technology like desktops and laptops was not budgeted for. It was agencies found money at the end of year savings, things like that. It was not a line item in the budget. So it was, we were not able to track how much we were going to spend and things. So what that led to in South Dakota was out of the 3,000 to 4,000 computers we had to deploy every year, about 90% of them hit in July, because that's when end of year budget spending happened. And so we always brought in high school help and interns and things like that. And we did a whole bunch of computer deployments in July, August, and September. And so we were pushing to be able to get to this so we could level out and have a consistent structure, exactly what this program is aimed to do. Before I was in the public sector in South Dakota, I worked for a non-for-profit and was in charge of hardware asset management. And so this is very much so what I would recognize as industry best practice, in both to do the volume purchasing, but also to level out the burden on the IT staff and things. The other things that benefits doing a program like this is you can become a lot more proactive in replacing these. I can see just pie in the sky type of thing. An employee gets an email, 2 months, 3 months before their computer is set to be replaced. And they go through and say, okay, your computer is going to be replaced. Here's what you currently have. Here's a list of our standards, and they can select, if they select a computer that's part of the standards, that's, you don't have to anything. If they need additional computing, hey, I want a 80-inch monitor or something crazy like that, then that's a separate purchase that would have to, look at, is that outside of the TRP, which I would consider, if you want a very special thing like that, it would be outside of this, and they'd have to have funding outside of agencies or something like that. And then we at the back end, once that's completed, and they can schedule, this is when works for me to replace my computer. And so once we get all that information, we have a month to get the computer, get it set up, get it imaged, get all the software installed, and then we go out at the scheduled time, pull the other computer back, put it in, transfer the files, say thank you type of stuff, and we're able to take that old computer back. That's one of the best practices is, it's hard getting a new computer, and all you're trying, you get your computer set up which the way you want it, and then you have to get it replaced. It's kind of a burden, but making sure that all flows well, and then recover the old device, because there's a lot of people like, well, I want to keep my old device for a year or so just to make sure I have everything. And having those duplicate devices out there adds a lot of burden onto my team to make sure they're managed and patched and stuff, especially when it's stuck in somebody's filing cabinet for 6 months and then they pulled it out and it doesn't work. There's more support to get for us to go help get it done. So if we can do this right, then it helps us be more efficient with support down the road as well.
I think we got Mr. Henderson first. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief clarification. Will the 277 budget just have the hardware? Or how will you handle any requisite training and manpower needs? Will those be populated in the normal way?
Mr. Chair? Yes. So the hardware and some of the end user software, it won't be like enterprise software, like major applications, but like Adobe and Microsoft Office and things that are installed on the endpoint. That's correct, Kevin, right? Just that level software? Yeah. As far as training and stuff, those, are you talking about like when we're getting new operating systems or different stuff, how do we help users? I don't know if we've considered that. Let me, Chief, do you?
Mr. Chairman, that would remain in 77, ETS's operating budget.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Please proceed. Anything else?
Mr. Coach.
This is the old one. I got the new one at home.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
First of all, let me ask you about servers and where we are on that. We always going back several years, it would be this department had servers, they wanted their own server room replaced. This one had servers, they wanted that room replaced. And it was our understanding that those were kind of on the way out, and that shared services were more the way to do than each department having their own closet with a server in it. Where are we on consolidation of servers into the cloud as opposed to each department having a server here, a server there, a server everywhere?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let me, I don't know if I have a phone friend. Do you know Jason, where we're at? Jenny? Yeah, let me defer to one of my chiefs that may know more of the server infrastructure than I do
Okay.
at this point in time, so.
Thank you.
Jason?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Jason Strobing. I am the Deputy CISO for the state of Wyoming, working over at ETS. We have been seeing more and more consolidation. Some of the larger agencies continue to chip away at it, but a lot of the smaller agencies have been consolidated into a strong and secure virtual environment, as well as into hard servers that are then going to be consolidated further as we go, just to get them inside of our walls and with the people who are securing them.
Okay, and then economically, is it best for us to be doing our own servers, albeit consolidated and secure, or is it better to lease or go to an outside firm that to handle that, and we just pay them an annual fee?
Sir, it's better to have them in-house to keep them secure. Quite frankly, we have good expertise and we know what's supposed to happen with those servers. Mr. Klein's, Director Klein's may have, more information than I do on that, but right now, I feel like when we outsource those kind of things, we run a real risk from a cybersecurity perspective, which is where I come at it from.
Okay. And Mr. Co-Chair, follow up on a couple of things. So the TERP deals with the hardware, but the big expense that we've been exposed to over the last several years is the software, where an agency comes in and says, we need 50 million now and another 50 million, and we've, without saying so, they've already selected the vendor. They knew from day one who the vendor was, and there was never a real contest to try and look at software as a service and whether that should be software that integrates enterprise-wide. Do you feel like you've got your arms around the software piece of it, which is much larger than the computers and the terminals and such? Where are we on software across all agencies and moving to an enterprise-wide software?
Mr. Chair, that's a very good question. Now, this answer will be, I've had a month here to learn it, but I don't think we have a good inventory of the applications that are used to run the business. Not like an endpoint, everything installed on local computers, Office and stuff like that, we have a good inventory of. But major applications, we don't have a good structure and inventory of it. And I would agree with you, that's where a lot of the opportunity lies for efficiencies. If we can have consolidated enterprise systems and use what you own is the way I frequently, how much we can get out of one system is a great opportunity for us as ETS to be able to push into do that, understand and how to do that. So I've already identified with my team wanting to develop what's called an application portfolio management system, where we're able to inventory and manage all of the applications that are used there. And then once you have an inventory, then you can identify where's duplication of systems out there and look for opportunities to combine and consolidate and thus get efficiencies and savings there.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chair, just one follow-up. And this is not anything I expect you to answer today, but, just a brief, half-page memo. YDOT was pretty critical in this, in that they've got Real ID. And they were looking to change or upgrade their platform, and there was pressure, at least from me, to say you'd better do that in a way that it can be used enterprise-wide and that you can integrate. And I don't know where we are on YDOT's software and whether their software selection was done in such a way as to accommodate its integration enterprise-wide. If somebody goes in and they need welfare benefits or a hunting license, YDOT's database of Real ID, my understanding is that was going to be critical to avoiding a lot of duplication and rooting out a lot of fraud. And so I don't know if you can answer that today, but, you know, a half-page memo before we come back in December would be appreciated as to whether that software selection has been done in a way that accommodates an enterprise-wide solution.
Mr. Chair, I'll take an action item on that to work with the YDOT to be able to generate that memo and have it ready for you.
Thank you.
And we would like to smile on our license plates one of these days instead of frown.
Something happens.
Okay, any other follow-up, Mr. Co-Chair?
No, thank you.
Okay, anything else?
Clark has.
Go ahead, Clark.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this question may be for Mr. Hibbard. If I understand it right, IT replacement hardware is under Object Code 242. And if we wanted to compare how much we budgeted for technology replacement to what was actually spent, you'd have to look at all the Chapter 17 reports for all the agencies for that Object Code 242. Is that right? And that seems pretty cumbersome. So is there an easier way to figure out the difference, if any, between the amount that was in a given year or biennium was budgeted for technology replacement and what was actually spent? Because if I just randomly look through the Chapter 17 reports for different agencies, it seems like, as maybe not unusual, but you'll have zero budgeted, but they'll spend $17,000, or they'll have $60,000 budgeted and they'll spend a lot less than that. And so, Mr. Hibbard, how would you get to the answer to that question of comparing what was budgeted for technology replacement to what was actually spent?
Mr. Chairman, by all means, you're correct. It is in Chapter 17, and we could facilitate that in a report as well for you to make that simple. Be happy to do that. Just give you a handout when we get you the TRP that says, here's how it was spent.
Okay, that would be helpful. Anything else for Mr. Klein, Director Klein? Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. Appreciate it tremendously.
Welcome, once again. Okay, I think we're moving along. Employee compensation distribution, is that right? A&I? ECA. Oh, we're doing ECA first? Let's. All right. Yeah, you're second, Trish. As usual. Okay, Matt, fire away.
Good morning, members of the committee. Mr. Chairman, Matt Wilmarth, LSO, Senior School Finance Analyst. Today I appear on behalf of the Chairman of the Joint Education Committee and that entire committee to provide an overview of its recommendation on the K-12 Education Resource Block Grant Model External Cost Adjustment for school year 2025-26. If you recall, this committee and the Joint Education Committee met September 26th to receive its annual K-12 monitoring reports, which consists of information from the LSO on the estimated cost of the K-12 education system or school finance system, the annual change in cost indices as recommended by your K-12 school finance consultants. You received teacher labor market information from LSO consultant Dr. Christina Stoddard, and then you received information from the Wyoming Department of Education on how school districts allocate resources from the K-12 Education Resource Block Grant Model. All of that said, the Joint Education Committee made its recommendation to this committee for a $66.3 million annual increase for the K-12 Education Resource Block Grant Model. That consists of an 8.5% increase to personnel categories for professional and non-professional staff, a 1.068% increase for educational materials, and a negative 6.285% ECA to the energy category. All in, about $66.3 million. The last two categories, the energy and the educational materials, are still subject to change based upon final data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. There's one more month to have that data finalized. So this committee's charge today is to provide a recommendation to the governor and the legislature by today. And so whatever action this committee takes today, we will put together any revised analysis and a letter for signature by the chairman and submit that to the governor and the legislature by the close of business today. So with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to take any questions of the committee. And
Vice Chair Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And Matt, I'd like to go back and to that joint meeting we had in Casper with the JEC and look at the memo that you had on prepared for that and make sure, because I'm trying to remember how we come up with the 56 million there approved by the JEC.
Don, while he's doing that, could you recirculate that to everybody?
And it appeared to me that based on that document, that using that 2020 recalibration method, they applied to, and we talked about between the statutory and the legislative models, there was a gap, and that's because they had applied the 2020 recalibration models, which accounted for, instead of an 8.5% on the professional, they used a 4.761, and instead of an 8.5 on the non-professional, they used a 5.41. The energy and the educational materials remain the same. And so to keep in line with and close that gap, if we were to, if I read it right, if we would have applied that, their recommendation was not to do anything, but if we wanted to keep that gap about the same, that then we would apply that same logic, meaning those percentages similar to what they had applied, which resulted in about a 36.9 million total ECA pending, and acknowledging that the energy and the materials may change as we get that last data. But then there was a motion made by the JEC to go past that. Could you just remind us how that happened? Was that bringing into other past ECAs that weren't funded ongoing, or how did we get up to the 8.5%, please?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Larson, the estimated difference between your consultant's evidence-based model for next school year and the legislative model or the statutory model is approximately $66.4 million. That's our best estimate. That presumes the ECAs as recommended by the consultants as applied for next school year. And you're right, those would be the lower amounts for personnel. And so the motivation or the recommendation from the Joint Education Committee was to zero that gap, that $66.4 million. They felt they wanted to zero that difference between your statutory funding model and the legislative funding model. That $66.4 million essentially resides all in the personnel resources, not just the prices, but the quantity of resources. And there are various differences between your consultant's model and your legislative model. That's existed for 20 plus years. But really the motivation from the Joint Education Committee was to essentially have the total cost of the two models be the same. And so in order to do that, since the difference between the two models essentially is in the personnel resources, they chose to inflate the ECA to 8.5% to close that difference to zero. That's really the motivation or the purpose of the recommendation.
So if we adopted the lower, the statutory model recommendation at the lesser amount on professional, non-professional, would it be a reasonable assumption that as we go into recalibration, that recalibration would reflect that difference and recommend a change to the model to close that gap then, or?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that's to be determined.
Thanks, Matt.
So further questions for Matt? So Matt, I think we need a little bit better understanding of closing the gap and what that means. And what and give us a better breakdown of what that 8.5 means. If they're solely just trying to make the two models meet, I think we need to go back into what the consultants are talking about on comparable wages for teachers and what that number was. And as I understand it, we're about tied, or I think Utah is about surpassing us or close to it now, but we're still ahead of everybody else in our region. And then what impact does the 8.5 have as related to what the recommendation was for the consultant?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, the 8.5% would be applied to the model salaries. What school districts do with that and how they allocate that to the personnel in their districts, there's 48 different decisions on how that will be done. And how that impacts Wyoming teacher salaries, those are decisions left to the local school boards.
That's not really my question. My question has to do with, are we, based upon the consultant's evaluation, are we still, through the model, paying over and above, based upon our calculations in the model, higher wages than our states surrounding us?
Mr. Chairman, your consultants don't necessarily make a recommendation on your comparable states. What they have recommended at the 2020 recalibration was to base your salaries for teachers, this is just only teachers, not all the other personnel categories, was on the 75th percentile of comparable occupations. Your current funding model does not reach that. Your current model wage does not reach that recommendation. For the 25-26 school year, the consultant's model would be just over $63,000. No ECA applied to the current legislative model. You're at $58,200. So you're about a $5,000 difference between your legislative recommendation for teacher salaries. Where that sits you in the region, I would have to go back and look at those reports. An 8.5% on your model salary, again, I would have to go back and see where that sits, where that would put you within the region.
Further questions? Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, help me understand, did we, it was my understanding we had a 4-point percentage increase in the ECA during the last legislative session, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Salazar, last legislative session, the ECA enacted by the legislature for professional staff was 3.871%. Non-professional staff was 4.106%. Educational materials was 21.852%, and energy was 14.64%.
So follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
So if we were to go ahead with this, we would be looking at close to a 12% increase over a 12-month period.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Salazar, I don't have those figures off the top of my head. I would have to calculate that. I don't know. The effective weight or weighted ECA as recommended by the Joint Education Committee is about 6.45%. So when you weight these categories on their amount associated to the total funding of K-12 education, the 8.5% doesn't necessarily mean it's a total 8.5%. It's only about 6.45% across the entire funding model.
That's just because some of them aren't less than.
Yeah,
8%.
yeah, Mr. Chairman, that I believe
Energy's-
education materials represents about 17% of the model.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
if allowed, I would like Mr. Wilmarth to spend more time explaining that, the difference between a weighted versus a total percentage, how that works when we're making a decision concerning these percentages as applied to the ECA, because I don't think that's clearly understood by this committee or the incoming committee. And I think it's just really important we all get our arms around that.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, what that essentially means is I look at the amount of funding that the professional staff make up of the total education resource block grant model and apply 8.5% to that percentage of total funding. And we do that for each of the 4 categories: energy, supplies, materials, professional staff, and non-professional staff. Professional staff make up a majority of the funding of the funding model. So when you apply 8.5% to each of those 2 personnel categories and the 1.068% for education materials, which represents about 17% of the model funding, and then negative 6.285% of the energy funding, which is a small percentage of the total funding, it comes out to a effective weight or effective percentage of about 6.45%. So while you may have or this assumption that the 8.5% is going to overwhelm the total ECA amount, it actually is overall about a 6.45% increase. Does that make sense? Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, another way to look at it is what is the essentially impact of this ECA recommendation? It's about a 6.5% increase overall. That's what it essentially means.
Further questions for Matt?
Mr. Chairman, where can that analysis, so what Senator Salazar did was to say, hey, last year we gave this % of an increase. Now they're asking for another % increase. Why is that not a total percentage increase? I think that's going to be a reasonable exercise for legislators to do when asked to vote on this in 6 or so weeks, 7 weeks. So where can resources be found to prevent that kind of obvious calculation or deductive reasoning in order to have a better understanding of how the weighted calculation applies?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, this gets back to some history. The legislature did used to just apply a single % to the funding model. Through work of this committee, particularly in 2010, 11, and 12, it sought better data and better reasoning as to what percentages to apply. And so it instructed the legislature school finance consultants to come back and recommend specific cost indices or external cost adjustments for categories of your K-12 funding model. The change in energy costs is different than education materials and personnel. And so your consultants have recommended a series of cost indices to target those categories. as you can see here, energy actually is a negative. I don't think people have seen their wages go negative. And so that's the purpose of this analysis, is to provide a more precise inflationary adjustment where last year you increased education materials almost 22% because the cost of supplies materials, according to BLS data, increased 22%. This year it's only 1%. And so by providing a more precise external cost adjustment, you are accounting for the cost of inflation in a more targeted approach. It was prior to the 2010 recalibration, it was a single ECA, which may have overrepresented or underrepresented some components of your funding model. And so that's the reasoning that you have this kind of four-pronged approach, and you can come to this weighted ECA average. But that's the history as to why this recommendation comes to you in a kind of four-pronged or four ECA recommendation.
Go ahead.
So, Matt, again, and I apologize maybe in going back, but when I came into the legislature, we had two models. We had the legislative and the evidence-based. The evidence was created from the consultant saying this is what you should be paying for education. At that time, the legislature, because for a variety of reasons, funded above that, as I recall, and we had the capacity and ability to do that. So it was always a wonderful thing that we funded more than what the consultant said we needed to. Then it looks like in about 18, 19, 17, 18, those two paths crossed, and the legislative model then started funding less than the evidence said we should, if I understand that correctly. And so then we got on this trajectory where the evidence cost and the legislative cost was moving along at the same rate, but at a lesser amount. And so we have this little gap. And so what the evidence-based, what the consultant said is there ought to be about this 4% increase to the evidence-based model, and if we do nothing, we widen that gap. If we go with the consultant's similar 4%, whatever that was, then we move along, but we still have that gap between being legislative funding less than what the consultants recommend. So then with what the JEC recommended, that closes the gap completely. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Romarth, from a litigation perspective, recognizing that that's pending and we've been sued for not funding education appropriately, what is advisable, knowing you're not our counsel, but what is advisable as far as the difference between the consultant's recommendation versus the legislative model to make arguably a lawful, as required by the Constitution and the Wyoming Supreme Court, for determining this proper amount?
Mr. Chairman, and Sarah, I don't know that I can answer it from a legal perspective. I'm not an attorney, I'm not providing legal advice. What I can tell you is the district court case, that record is closed. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercutt, I'll start over. I will not provide any legal advice. I'm not an attorney. What I can say is the district court record is closed, so no new evidence can be presented in that case. What I do know is, from my time here at the Department of Education, it's anticipated this district court case will be appealed by either side or both sides to the Wyoming Supreme Court. The Wyoming Supreme Court has taken notice of legislative action, either through a recalibration effort or through external cost adjustments. So I guess what I would offer is the legislature action on external cost adjustments or recalibration certainly will be noticed by the Wyoming Supreme Court, or at least recognizes what is done or not done.
And Mr. Chairman, in light of the fact that there's no new case law available yet from this pending litigation, based on the current case law, so the current state of the law, can you give us some direction as to the wisdom of either choice?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Nethercott, the external cost adjustment is part of your cost-based approach. It ensures that your model remains cost-based through years of recalibration. So between a recalibration effort, which is to set the cost, and years between the next recalibration, your statute calls for the legislature to evaluate the necessity of inflation and an external cost adjustment to ensure your model remains cost-based. And so that's the purpose of your external cost adjustment.
You want to add to that?
Mr. Chairman, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office Operations Administrator. No, I think Mr. Wilmarth did a great job of encapsulating the discussion from the Supreme Court, and we're happy to provide advice in an executive session on the case and potential risks and benefits, but don't feel it's appropriate to do so in a public setting with a pending case.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, did not ask for that at all. And the case may not be decided before January, and so we'll be having to vote and make public statements where legislative intent will be considered. And so guiding both this committee, future members who are here with us now who will be voting on this, I think the more discussion and open debate we have without concern for pending litigation, I think is just more realistic as to the discussions that need to take place by us here. And so I think the failure for us to have open dialogue about these issues is unfortunate. And I want to make sure that those continue and the right questions are asked without fear about those realities. And so that's it. But I'm not asking for legal advice per se, but we do know that there's been a long history of Supreme Court precedent concerning funding the ECA. We're being asked to vote on that right here today. And so guidance on that vote, I think, is helpful in light of the historical precedent that currently exists.
Well, two different things. Number one, if the committee would like, we'd be happy to go in an executive session just to learn a little bit more. But number two, but I also, my question is, in the presentations in the court proceedings, there wasn't my understanding is there wasn't a lot of focus on that $30 million gap between the models, and there was no expert testimony presented on it. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, that's what my testimony at that district court case was about.
And what did you testify to?
Mr. Chairman, I testified on this process and what the legislature's actions have been.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, what I would say, just because I am a lawyer, and because we've been cautioned to not talk about the pending litigation or to try to anticipate court's determination, my question was really focused on the historical precedent that is published and not trying to influence or get advice on an opinion that may come or to talk to their testimony right now. So I would urge caution and eject from this conversation without moving for executive session. The scope of my questions is related to the progeny of published Supreme Court decisions that currently exist.
Go ahead.
Tanya, if I may, just to, going back on the preceding, the Campbell cases, if we could, what we learned there is that if we choose legislatively to fund over what the consultants say, we're in good shape. That's fine. When we start funding less than what the consultants, you know, we go through the process, but when we start funding less than what they say, then you start flirting with the equity and you start flirting with getting into some trouble. So being equal to or above has always kind of been, since those cases, is where the legislature has tried to position themselves. Is that fair to say?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think that's a good encapsulation of the Campbell 4 decision, is they termed that excess funding legislative grace. There are a number of areas where the legislature has chosen to fund in excess of what your consultants recommend. With regard to the external cost adjustment, basically, in a nutshell, this is encapsulating, you know, hundreds of pages of decisions, but what they said is, while you rely on sort of an expenditure-based model and you recognize that it's not real time, you must inflate, or you must account for inflation within that model. And how that's done, or what indices you look at, or what that process looks like, the court recognized that as well within the legislature's discretion. And that is exactly what Mr. Wilmar spoke to about refining the process in 2010 through 2012.
Okay, further discussion, further questions? So committee, does the committee want to make a motion, or do you want to consider this and bring this back up in the afternoon?
Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to make a motion. We can vote it down if you don't want to.
Make a motion.
So
Before we do that, let's get into the public comment before we take no action. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brian Farmer. I'm the Executive Director for Wyoming School Boards Association. With me is Dr. Boyd Brown. He's the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. And Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to begin by thanking the Wyoming Legislature for the manner in which you have funded education. Wyoming does a good job. And so I think the questions that Representative Larson and Senator Nethercott asked are really good at getting to the question that's before you right now. Why do we care about these differences in ECA recommendations? And I think the easiest answer is to start with saying that the court said that we have to have a cost-based system to funding education in Wyoming. And so the legislature hired consultants, and the consultants came up with a cost-based system as an adequate system for funding education in Wyoming. That is your evidence-based model. The consultant's model is what it would take to adequately fund education in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. And I want to start a little bit, excellent explanation. Look forward to the rest. I want to start off even more historically. Why does the legislature have to fund education in the way that it does? What is the sourcing of the requirement of the ECA and consultants?
Mr. Chairman, excellent question, going back to the beginning of the discussions in the Washakie case, in the Campbell cases, all dealing with Wyoming's Constitution. And Wyoming's Constitution finding education to be a right bestowed on the school children of the state of Wyoming. And so our Constitution imposes an obligation on the state of Wyoming to provide for an adequate education. That's what it means to have the constitutional right. The state has the obligation to provide for that.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Does this constitutional right exist in all 50 states? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, so Wyoming's Constitution is unique. It is not the same as the constitutions of all 50 states. Wyoming has gone judicially beyond where most states have gone. The question of a federal right to education has been discussed, considered, but not articulated. So it is the courts of Wyoming that have provided this direction based on the Constitution of Wyoming. And so when we look at Wyoming, it is different from when we look at other places, because other places don't have the same constitutional guidance that we do. It comes from the constitutional guidance of our state. And so really this legislature has done a good job of trying to adhere to that direction of the court, to adhere to what does it mean to provide for that right for school children. And we've done a good job of funding. And the court did say, as your staff has provided excellent explanation for you as well, that we do have to consider for the effects of inflation. And so we have to say, when we determine that cost, when they build this evidence-based model, year after year, there is inflation. There are inflationary pressures, and we have to figure out how does that change the cost of education. And so, as Representative Larson discussed, some time ago, we used to talk about things like legislative grace. We used to talk about ornaments on a Christmas tree. But that was at a time where the legislative model exceeded the evidence-based model. And at that time, we used to call the evidence-based model the constitutional floor. Mr. Chairman, we've fallen below the constitutional floor, which means that we are now in jeopardy of potentially not funding an adequate education system. And so this is a pertinent question to litigation. It's a pertinent question to the present litigation that is before the court. It has been a question before the court in the past. And we are seeking to say, let's fund education at that adequate level. And so the recommendation of the Joint Education Committee has brought that funding to that constitutional floor, to that adequate level. We're not talking about ornaments on a Christmas tree. We're not talking about grace. We're not talking about excess. We are talking about what is the adequate constitutional level. And the recommendation gets us to that point. Mr. Chairman, I would also say, you asked a very good question about, well, do we pay better than other states? And Mr. Chairman, I think if you take a look at Dr. Stoddard's materials from that previous discussion, her slide number 23 is the best of those because your memory is great. You see Wyoming's line is just below Utah's line. But Mr. Chairman, that's what school districts pay. That is not what the state funds. We're talking about making an adjustment to the state funding. And so you have to go down to the dotted line in her graph. And in that dotted line in her graph, Wyoming only exceeds South Dakota. It is below every surrounding state. And so, Mr. Chairman, that's the number we're talking about today is the model number. We're talking about making adjustments to the model number so that we can be up there and competitive with our surrounding states, not that we're at the bottom. Mr. Chairman, it used to be a proud moment when we could say Wyoming was among the best. We were number 6 in the nation for teacher salaries. Today we're 26. We've lost a lot of that power. And as to Senator Nethercott's question about understanding weighted averages, I think people can understand if you take the dollar bill and you look at what percentage of that dollar bill goes to paying my people, you cut out about 80 to 88% of that dollar bill to pay people. Every dollar that you fund, 80 to 88% of that dollar goes to paying people. And I use those numbers because that's what school districts' salary and personnel costs. Between 80 and 80% of every dollar you send to the school district goes to paying people. And so when we make these adjustments to the personnel sides, the non-personnel, or the professional and the support staff, those adjustments are going to pay for people where the materials are a much smaller piece of that dollar. And the energy, sounds ridiculous to hear that energy is in the negative. My energy bills have been going way up. They're not going negative. I'd love that if we could get that in the state, but that's not where we're at. We're not arguing that. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about adequate. And so we're asking you to fund that adequate. We're asking you to get us to that constitutional floor. And we are encouraging you to think about what is the obligation the legislature has to the school children of the state of Wyoming. How do we account for that cost of an adequate education in alignment with the consultant's model, in alignment with that evidence-based model is probably the best way to get there. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to comment. And again, I do want to say thank you to the legislature. You guys have done a great job of funding education in Wyoming.
Boyd, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of School Administrators. Excuse me. Again, I would like to thank you. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the things that Brian said. I agree with everything he said, but you don't need to hear that. One thing that I would like for you guys to know is there's times whenever we talk about not getting the bang for our buck. I want you to know that out of the states that make every student in their state take the ACT test score, or the ACT test, Wyoming scores the highest this year. So you should be proud of that. I do believe we had 3 students in Wyoming who scored perfect scores on that, and we had plenty of others that were very high. So we should be very proud of that. Our scores on the national test, the NAEP test, we're the best west of the Mississippi. Most of those schools are on the East Coast. So our state does a great job, and the reason we do a great job is because our legislature has done a great job of funding education. The last thing I want to say is there's this idea that we have ghost employees out there. And the reason we have ghost employees is because we pay about $8,000 more than the model funds. So that's why we have ghost employees. That $8,000, if you multiply it by the number of ghost employees you have, you come up with the exact amount that we are short there in FTEs. With that, I'd answer questions, but again, I want to thank you and just remind you that we do have a great education system and you guys do a great job funding it.
Questions for Boyd? Thank you for your testimony. Anybody else like to testify? Anybody else? Okay, we'll close public testimony. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
In light of the conversation we have had today in review, I think, and I think that we really do need to at least be at the same level recommended by the consultants to be on the evidence to support that the legislature is funding at the same level that evidence is. And so I would adopt the Joint Education Committee recommendation.
Second. Moving second, discussion?
No. Go ahead.
No.
Mr. Co-Chair, I appreciate the sentiment. I have to be opposed to it for several different reasons. First is we received a Craig report that did show some good money in there somewhere. Dang phone rings always at the wrong time, doesn't it? But there were reason for caution in there. Coal continues to decline. Our fortunes are being buoyed by oil and gas pricing. That can't hold. And I'm concerned that there's storm clouds on the horizon. We're going to have another Craig update in January when there will be a new legislative body seated. And I think it would be prudent to await any action on this until we see that next Craig report, if for that reason only. The other reason is that we've got recalibration coming up. That has to happen every 5 years. That's a top-to-bottom reexamination of the entire model. There are some issues in that model, absolutely, that need to be reexamined. And rather than something like 8.5% on the interim, I would prefer that the next legislative body, for which I won't be here, but have an opportunity to receive a recalibration report and look at it. The other thing is that I think we can go for a period of time without this substantial increase. K-12 is very well funded in Wyoming. We hear about the model versus the actual and so forth. The fact of the matter is, on a per student basis, we fund education better than 43 other states. So our schools are doing very well. They're performing very well. And yes, as we've heard testimony, we have funded them very well and will continue to do so. And then finally is just this, my constituents aren't getting raises on the order of 8.5%. They're continuing to struggle with rising costs, including rising property taxes, notwithstanding the partial relief that we've given them. And for all those reasons, I'm going to be a no on this proposed increase. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, further comments? Clark, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I'm in favor of the motion. I wish inflation did not exist, but it does. In the past couple of sessions, we gave substantial increases to our other state employees, totaling about 18%, and that reflected that we needed to be competitive in the market. The larger question of the cost-based model and whether the Campbell decisions represent optimal policy is just something that we here today don't get to vote on. That's a much bigger topic. A lot can be said for, whether the Campbell decisions themselves make sense, but they are the law as we have to deal with it today. So for all of those reasons, I'm in favor of the motion and adopting the JEC recommendation.
Further comments? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is we do need to make this decision today, and I will be voting in favor of it because this is the #1 issue I hear at the door from my constituents, that they value our K through 12 education system, that they value our teachers. And in knocking doors, I met teachers' aides who are making more at McDonald's than they are in the classroom, and that is unacceptable. So I am in favor of this motion.
Further comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I would move to amend or Representative Larson's motion for a reduced percentage of an increase to the ECA. And I'd move to make that 2%. The reason for that is a candid and solid understanding that this committee will not exist moving forward. And so what that will require the future committee to do in January is to make the determination. And they have the tool in the toolbox to do that by having a percentage placeholder for consideration. Move it up, move it down, or kill it. But that option is available. And that percentage requires, I think, that discussion to occur to move it up, to move it down, or kill it. And we are not having to make that determination here today, as opposed to the full appropriation or a zero appropriation, that there's actually considerable more flexibility. Let's allow that next legislative body to have those discussions, to consider the January CRAG, to get some insight into recalibration, talk to LSO staff, have legal advice in executive session. There may be a legal decision made, but this will require those public decisions to be discussed and the rationale for that committee to be made. So that's my motion. I hope the representative finds it friendly.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would second that motion.
Move to second. Discussion on the motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Don? 1 second. Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, just to clarify, are you suggesting all 4 components be 2% or okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I guess we had a motion on the floor to approve the JEC recommendation, right? And so isn't the question whether the mover and the second for those motions agree to this amendment to that motion? Isn't that the order of business we have to follow?
Right, we are on the amendment now.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I clarify? Based on Don's question, I believe it's the JEC's recommendation to do the 8% overall increase. It's not 2% each for me, it's just the general 2%. So it's an overall total reduction from the 8.6 to the 2, whatever that 8 number is.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, so the JEC's recommendation is 8.5% to professional and the same for non-professional. We leave materials and energy as they don't touch that. And so my question would be then the 2% would apply to professional and non-professional, correct? So I think, Mr. Chairman, we ought to vote on my motion. If that fails, then let's entertain the second motion. Isn't that, because the motion's on the floor, you don't amend a motion, do you?
Yeah, you amend motions.
Okay. Well, then the amendment's up there, so if we want to,
The question was that a friendly amendment?
well, so then
So
no.
the answer is
no. Doesn't mean it can't happen then, no, but.
But we are on the amendment, so. Question on the amendment? On your amendment. It doesn't mean, he doesn't have to, that doesn't have to be friendly to have an amendment.
I find you friendly, amendment.
So.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Questions get asked and then they get answered by people that don't have their mics on. So some of us don't get to hear the answers. So could we just go over what the 2%, are we lowering it to 2% or we're lowering it by 2%? I didn't hear the answer to Don's query.
It's being lowered to 2%.
Okay, thank you.
For the two categories.
From 8.5% to reduced down to 2%, correct?
Any further discussion on the motion? You got your hand up? Go ahead, Clark.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. So just so I understand what the amendment is, is this reduction to 2%, does that only apply to the professional staff and the non-professional staff, or is the motion simpler? It does. Okay. So the ECA then could actually, I don't know, can we hear from Matt Wilmart or somebody to find out? Because then the ECA itself might be negative, right? Because if I understood Mr. Wilmarth, what he said was the effect of the JEC recommendation was a net increase of 6.45% after you weight everything. And so my question really is this, what's the dollar impact if we know? The motion on the floor is at $66.3 million. Is there a way to know how many $1 million this amendment represents?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Matt Wilmarth, a 2% ECA for just the personnel categories and remaining at the 1.068% for education materials and negative 6.285%. I believe the personnel categories will be about a $16 million increase. And then if we look at the education materials, it'd be 1.7 million, and energy would be negative 3.7 million. So doing math on the fly, maybe just over 12 million.
Okay, any further comments on the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. We have 4. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That motion fails. Now we are back on the original motion. Any further discussions on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That motion passes. All those opposed?
Don't you need both sides? You need a majority of both sides.
I don't know the answer to that, Don.
Mr. Chairman, this is not a vote on final passage of the bill. Pursuant to your rules, a majority of those assemble, or a majority of the quorum, the total.
Okay, so what was the final count?
7-4. Is that correct, 7-4? Or 7-5? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll write up a letter for your approval by noon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Don, what's next?
Mr. Chairman, the Director of Department of Administration and Information is here to present an update on their distribution of your appropriation from the 2024 budget bill for employee compensation within the executive branch.
Are you the mother of a ninja warrior? How did the ninja warrior fare you last week?
That's so much. In terms of handouts, is there any?
We have a handout on.
Okay, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Bach. I'm the Director of A&I, and I'm here to talk about Phase 3 Executive Branch Compensation. This is something that, I'm here with Aaron Williams, HRD Administrator, and also with Jared Hansen, who is the Program Manager. They actually have more knowledge on how this is distributed. This is something that was allocated last year. So we're not asking for any more appropriation. This is something that was already appropriated, and we're here to give you an idea of how the governor's office, budget, and A&I kind of worked through the process to see what best worked to ease compression issues. That was our main goal. So if you remember, we had introduced version and an enrolled version. We ended up with $9 million to fix compression. And the final distribution is 8.8 million for the executive branch agencies, and then approximately 300,000 for the judicial branch. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Aaron Williams and Jared to talk about how we evaluated with the governor's office and budget to ease the compression that we have. And to remind you about compression, one example with compensation is sometimes you end up having supervisors and employees getting pretty close to one another. We want to fix that. We have people coming in at 90% now, which is very helpful. You'll see in our workforce report this session that we have made some good strides on compensation and recruitment. But when you have somebody who's coming into a new position, say, for example, as an engineer, and then they're making almost the same, sometimes slightly more than somebody who's been there for 5 years. So this is the process to make that gap a little further and compensate the people that have been here the longest, to get them a little bit further away from that 90 and closer to the MPP. Thank you.
Chairman Nicholas and members of the committee, the goal of the Phase 3 Executive Branch Compensation, as Director Bach had mentioned, is to ease compression for longer tenured employees who are paid below the market policy position. So we're still getting people to the MPP of our pay tables. We anticipate the effective date of this being January 1, 2025. To be eligible, an employee must be employed with the executive branch as of November 1st, 2024, not have experienced a break in service from November 1st through January 1 of 2025, and have completed 1 year of service as of November 1st, 2024, or received a 2023-2024 performance evaluation. The criteria that we used for this is a little different than the methodology applied in phase 1 and phase 2. As you're very well aware, the desire and the need with those phases was for retention. We were struggling recruiting new employees to all of our agencies, especially the lower level pay bands. And so a lot of our previous emphasis was getting those employees off of the minimum of the pay tables, and like Director Bach said, to the 90% or to a minimum of $15.50. In doing so, we exacerbated the issue of compression that we had. We felt at the time that was the appropriate step to take to ease the recruiting issues that we were having. Phase 3 now focuses on retention of our longer tenured employees. The methodology applied this time in the matrix is about a quarter of those dollars go towards a percentage allocation of performance. The other 3/4 or 75% focuses on longevity. The staff have broken that out based on years of service from 0 years with the state. So new employees, as Director Bach mentioned, is at 90%. And we capped it at 11 years plus. There just wasn't enough dollars to distribute 20, 25, 30 years of service. So we incrementally increased the target compa ratio we were shooting for by years of service up to new hires to 11 years plus. The general fund allocation of that per year comes out to about $5.9 million. The estimated results of the increases that we will distribute in January affect 66% of the current workforce. 5,078 employees will be eligible for an increase. The average increase, only of those who will be receiving an increase with this movement, not everyone will be receiving those, is 3%. And the average compa ratio with phase 1 and phase 2, where our employees sitting at now, is 94.7% of MPP. After this distribution, employees will move to overall 96.5% of the MPP, just to kind of give you an idea of where we'll still be with the compa ratio.
So what I don't understand about that is that doesn't sound like relieving compression. That says people from the first to 11 years are all getting a 3% pay raise. And so what am I missing?
Oops, my microphone won't turn on. Chairman Nicholas, there's a matrix that goes into effect just like we did with the compa ratios and the comparison where employees were based on their performance. And so we have a methodology in place. And Jared maybe might want to take a stab at this a little better than I do. So we look at an employee's performance with their last performance evaluation, where they are in comparison to that compa ratio. And then there is an indicator, a percentage that's applied based on their years of service. So we're comparing employees with 0 years of service to 90% of MPP, ensuring they're all there. All the way on up to 11 plus years employees, we're working between 90% and 102% of compa ratio. So there will be a percentage differential between each of those years of service.
And Chairman, I can also explain a little bit, and obviously they are more in the weeds than I am, but when I look at it, if you look at the average compa ratio after the increases, not everybody's getting 3%. Some people are only getting 0.5%, and those are at the lower years of service. So if you look at 1 year of service, they're at essentially 90%. If you go all the way up to 11 years of service, they're at 97%, so they're getting the higher percentage to move them away from the folks below them.
And then on your performance compensation, how does that divide out? Meaning, of your 5,000, 6,000 employees, what's the number that are high performing? Is it like 4 categories, 5 categories, or 2 categories? In other words, does it really mean something? And how does that carry over?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jared Hansen again, Program Manager with the Human Resources Division. To answer your question, Chairman Nicholas, we've got there's 4 ratings, and so our scale and performance Employees can receive anywhere from an unsatisfactory rating to a superior rating, and what that equates to numerically is essentially 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So performance essentially for our superior performers caps at a 4. On average, I can tell you, during the 2023-2024 performance evaluation, our overall average was about 2.5, 2.6, and historically, that's always been the case. I think every year we've been right around that number. I don't have the specific numbers with me in terms of where our workforce landed on that scale, but I can tell you that, to answer your question, when we take that 25% of performance, it's not I wouldn't clarify performance as a driving force with where people are going to end with this. We really wanted to emphasize years of service because the last 2 years of increases have been really predominantly based on performance and where employees were paid within their range. And so it's not where people are going to end up after this, after these increases is really going to be determined by their years of service. We just still wanted to honor performance because the last thing we wanted to do was have employees jump other higher performing employees with this, essentially negating what progress we've made with our higher performing employees the last 2 years. And so we still wanted to honor performance, but years of service is really the driving force with these increases.
And remind me on your longevity pay, what do state employees receive on a regular basis for longevity?
Chairman, longevity is $40 for every 5 years of service.
Okay, go ahead, please proceed.
Chairman Nicholas, members of the committee, that's the distribution methodology for these increases. I did want to point out that Phase 1 and Phase 2 were very appreciative of the increases that the legislature has approved. We have started to already see, the last time we were here, we were kind of uncertain what those increases had done to our workforce and recruiting and retention data. The staff has just completed the 2023-2024 workforce report. We are still lagging the market with our new updated market data in 2023. We're still on the 2020 pay tables that we implemented in 2021. The general pay table on average is still a 7% market lag. Our highway patrol criminal investigation, we're still 6.3% behind. The executive pay table, 2.2% market lag. Nursing pay table, 16.3%. And the attorney pay table, 8.7%. So these increases that we will be distributing in January will definitely help make sure that we're moving closer to that market average.
Could you remind us when you say market, is that a regional market, is it a national market?
Yes, we use local and regional market data sources. The turnover data that we would like to share that's extremely positive. We still do have employees hopping from agency to agency seeking promotional opportunities, but in 2021-2022, our turnover including transfers was at 24.8%. As of this most recent workforce report, we have driven that down to 16.3%. The 10-year history excluding transfers in 2021-2022, when we started these phases of compensation allocations, was 22.8%. And as of 2023-2024, it's 14.8%. So it shows that what we've worked jointly in collaboration with is working for our employees as far as recruiting goes. We are also hearing from agencies that their quality of applicants is increasing, as well as the number of applicants they're receiving. And so our last recruitment data update, when we first came to you expressing concerns with the recruiting that we were seeing due to the salaries we were able to offer, we were seeing on average 13 applications received per recruitment, and that number is now 19. And so just some positive stats that we wanted to share with you.
Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that report. When are we going to see the full report, workforce service report?
Chairman Nicholas, Senator Grew, the workforce report is on the ANI website. It was just published last week. So what we can do is get a copy of that report, multiple copies over here if you would like them in paper.
Yes, please. And if I can follow up.
Go ahead.
talk about this, if this proposal goes through, it starts January 1st, 25. How does that work? This budget's not going to get done and go into effect until July. So I take it we're talking about a retroactive catch up in July from January 2, or is there more money around that I don't know about?
Chairman Nicholas, Senator Guru, this is money that was allocated last year. We just have not, we had to take some time to really figure out what was going to be the best distribution and how we were going to fix compression. So that's why it's not going to start until January 1st, 2025. So that's why we're not here asking for funds. We're here to explain, one, why it wasn't distributed initially and why we waited until January 1st.
So what's your number of vacancies now? How's that changed over time?
Chairman Nicholas, I can get you the actual numbers. We're working on a vacancy report for the LSO this month. Generally speaking, it's usually somewhere around 800 vacancies, but that changes on which one's vacant at any time. So we'll have a report to LSO, I think November 4th. Did we say? Mid-November, sorry.
And does that report also include the length of time for those?
It does,
sir. If you've got good turnover, that's a good thing. But if you got vacancies and no turnover, then.
Chairman Nicholas, it'll look just like the ones every year, and I think what we do, how we process that is we send out the vacant reports to each agency because there's a lag. So if something was vacant on October 15th, it may not be vacant now. So they have the opportunity to say, we filled that, or we're recruiting, or whatever explanation they have. So we'll have explanation on where they are on the status of that position, and it'll say how many months it's been vacant.
Okay, further questions for Director Bosch? Anything else?
That's it. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us an update. Yeah, we can take a break. We're pretty close to 9:45, so we're on time, it looks like. Why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with agency follow-ups.
Good job, Bob. Boy, there you go.
Boom.
Oh, wow. Keep knocking them out.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Julie Cook, Wyoming Department of Agriculture. Director Miyamoto sends his regrets not being able to attend today. He had a previous engagement out of town. We're here to answer any questions that you have on the veto that you addressed in your topic on your agenda. During the last
No, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, no handouts for this agenda item. You'll recall that the 2024 budget bill was adopted by the legislature, and then the legislature left town prior to a receipt of any governor's vetoes. I believe this issue relates to a requested transfer of funds from the Game and Fish account for purposes of invasive species. And the governor vetoed that, but followed up and indicated that administratively, he would consider potential options for the transfer of funds.
Mr. Chairman, the department is able to accept the $1 million from the Game and Fish if the commission is to appropriate those funds over to us, and we can spend them as designated on the Endangered Species Initiative. My understanding of the veto was it was just that he didn't say they couldn't move the money or we couldn't use it for that purpose. He felt that that commission should be the one that determined if they wanted to do the 1 million and send that over to us, to our Animal Damage Management Board for appropriation after that.
And so the question is then, have you worked with the Game and Fish, or maybe had discussions to do it? Has anything transpired?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Slade Franklin, Technical Services Manager for the Department of Ag. ADMB is made up of both Game and Fish and the Department of Agriculture. They were aware of this. I can't tell you if they had internal discussions or the commission had a discussion with that. As I'm aware, the director isn't aware of any discussions that they had either. So at this time, I can't answer that question, what discussions happened. And I also want to clarify, if I could real quickly, that veto and that appropriation was for predator management, not for invasive species. Yeah.
Okay. And then in terms of what we did appropriate for predator management, how is that, what's the progress or success rates, or what's the status of that?
Mr. Chairman, during that same appropriation, $600,000 of additional funding was given to the Animal Damage Management Board for the use of endangered species. And that was allocated, 300,000 of that. We cut that in half for the biennium. And each of the districts who participate in our program received a contract that requires them to use their portion of that, $300,000 in the endangered species area. And then the additional 300,000 that was done will be in the next round of funding for the next second half of the biennium.
Okay. Thank you for the update. Any questions for Department of Ag? Thank you very much. I think that covers it. Okay, Family Services is up next.
Morning, Ben.
Go ahead, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt. I'm the director of the Wyoming Department of Family Services. I'm going to let Dr. Moritz go ahead and start the conversation, since I believe the reason why we've been asked to testify today is an update on SLEDS per the footnote that was in the budget bill.
Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas and members of Joint Appropriation, thank you. Yes, we're happy to give you an update. As you might know, the Community College Commission has been tasked with implementing the SLEDS project, a statewide longitudinal educational data system. We operate that program through a federal grant that we received through the Wyoming Department of Education. And the DFS, the Department of Family Services, is a new member of that consortium. They joined us relatively recently, and just also recently joined the executive board of that organization. We don't have a lot to report. Over the last year, we have taken kind of a pause on the SLEDS project. The first federal grant that we received, 1.0, that is running out. We received a second grant from the federal government, 2.0. We received that in November 2023. We didn't obtain budgetary authority, the B11 on that, until September of this year. So over that period of time, we had to curtail some of our operations on that and are just standing that back up. In that interim, we have not done a lot of work on some of these projects. And so we are now getting going again, and once we get started, some of our first projects are to utilize the 2.0 grant funds to provide resources to the participating entities, amongst those being DFS, to utilize those funds for research and data input and data cleanup. So I believe with some of those resources, DFS will be able to utilize that for the data that would be related to E-KIDS. So.
And maybe you'll get to this, but I think just refresher for the committee. The Department of Family Services had been, there had been a contract with an outside consultant to gather the information on kids, the preschool kids. And when that ran out, it was placed, I believe, in the Department of Family Services to then incur in their budget and move forward. We felt that that type of data should have been incorporated in SLEDS. And so in our budget hearings, when we seen it in DFS budget, we had moved it over to SLEDS. A couple of us were taken to the woodshed and said, no, we really don't want it in SLEDS, and can we put it back in DFS? And we said, okay. But then the reason for this meeting is we kind of done that conditionally, as you'll recall, saying that, yes, this idea of using a consultant, this contract to gather this data is fine, but we would expect that we would be able to shift that over and then start collecting that data through SLEDS. And hence we were wanting to see if that's how, is that still a reasonable expectation? Or am I saying that right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, since we're talking mostly about E-KIDS, I'll kind of interject and give a little bit of a catch up on where we are as the Department of Family Services. So the current E-KIDS system sits with a company called 3SI, and that's that vendor that you were mentioning. We are in the process of contracting with them using the funds that were appropriated to us per our request and then per the budget footnote. The governor did line item veto some parts of that footnote that spoke to the transition of the system and the funding to the Wyoming Community College Commission. So what we are doing as an agency is kind of sitting in the middle of both of those systems, trying to position ourselves from a data analytics perspective and a capacity perspective to be flexible to go either way. What the plan is right now is that the information in E-KIDS will connect to SLEDS. That's part of what SLEDS 2.0 is looking at. But in regard to the footnote itself, we'll be executing the contract. The footnote also says that we're not to come back for, and request more money, so we'll manage it till its end, and then at that point, make some policy decisions about how to move forward.
So let's go back to the underlying question, though. What is your preference and why? Just kind of regurgitate where we were before.
Mr. Chairman, we've been agnostic in a lot of these conversations, understanding that we think getting the data is important. So at the end of the day, having the ability to collect and analyze the data that's through E-KIDS, which is preschool, basically, we believe that's important. So we're going to support whatever effort. SLEDS, our involvement with SLEDS is because we see great capacity there for us to understand more about the students and the children that we serve in terms of their educational achievement and attainment. E-KIDS would not offer that, but SLEDS does. So we understand that for the earlier kids, ESIDS is what we have available to us right now. We're doing our best to enhance that and make it useful. But for the rest of our kids, recognizing that SLEDS is a really important component. There are models in the US where E-KIDS and SLEDS share data back and forth. There's models where SLEDS has expanded to include E-KIDS, and there are models where E-KIDS and SLEDS stand very separate. So I think the position we're in right now is to continue to work with SLEDS, build out that capacity because it's important to us from an educational outcomes for children that we serve through DFS. And then at the time that the governor's office and everybody's ready to make a decision about how to continue through SI, then we'll have more input there.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming over. Okay, I think next up is Dr. Perry. Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, Mike Smith with the University of Wyoming, and just here, my name appeared on the agenda, but we think it's more appropriate for Dr. Peary to be here and explain his program. So with your permission, I'll just defer to Dr. Peary.
Yeah, welcome, Dr. Peary. And committee, you might recall the reason that he's here is because of the substantial sums that we have been matching dollars on various projects. And as a result of that, we thought that it was important for the JAC just kind of to get regular updates on the progress of the contracting and on the work being performed, just because of the significant investment the state of Wyoming is making through Dr. Peary. So welcome, Dr. Peary, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Could you pull that mic a little closer?
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Joint Appropriations Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update about our work at the Center of Innovation for Flow-Through Pursuit at the University of Wyoming. I'll start perhaps with the Thermo Fisher Scientific Initiative.
So I think you still need to make that mic a little closer.
I'm sorry.
And slow down a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So perhaps I'll start with Thermo Fisher Scientific Initiative. If you may recall, we had a $75 million commitment from Thermo Fisher, and we ultimately ended up perhaps at least from contracting point of view, splitting it to two phases, $40 million phase one and $35 million phase two. You, together with your colleagues, kindly appropriated with governance support $40 million for phase one. I'm delighted to tell you that on October 18, we fully executed a contract that has 3 signatures on it: Thermo Fisher signature, University of Wyoming President's signature, plus signature from Governor's Office. So is that fully executed? The contract was reviewed carefully, both at the Thermo Fisher, at the University of Wyoming, and by Governor's Office. So the contract went back and forth until everyone was pleased with the details, and it was executed on October 18th. And then we had a formal ceremony to celebrate the partnership on the October 28th. This was attended by Thermo Fisher leadership, university leadership, and members of the state leadership. So, I'm very grateful for that. Thank you very much. We are already in discussions with Thermo Fisher regarding various instrumentation that we would customize for applications of for applications in university research. And on that, maybe I can also provide additional details that I have been working with the university. We have our website now includes the detailed instructions about how members of the university community can access instrumentation at high bay. And you can just go on CUIPM.org website and you can see detailed procedure there. And so that's there. We have also scheduled tours, regular tours. People are welcome to come and see the instrumentation and request additional information if they need to, how they can use the instrumentation for the research. I thought I would mention that. I have also worked with the Vice President of Research at the University of Wyoming, Vice President Chitnis, on perhaps identifying locations on campus where we can put some of this in Thermo Fisher instrumentation outside high bay. Vice President Chitnis mentioned to me that Science Initiative building could be a candidate for that. So if that's finalized, then the goal is that 2 of the first state-of-the-art high-resolution X-ray macro CT scanners will be put in the Science Initiative building, not in high bay, to start with. That's it's just a step we are taking initially to entice campus community for using the instrumentation. I thought to mention that as well. And then we are also in collaboration with the Vice President Bill Nye and Vice President Chitnis. We are looking at this space. As you know, space was a key element of this initiative. There's no space in high bay, so we are working.
Co-Chair, which space were you talking about, Doctor?
Senator Kingsky, Mr. Chairman, Vice President Bill Nye and Vice President Chitnis, they have discussed some space on campus. I don't think they are publicly announced yet because of the internal considerations.
Okay, some space for what?
For installing new instrumentation from Thermo Fisher.
Oh, it's not going to go into the high bay?
Because high bay doesn't have a space.
I see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But there is existing space at university that Vice President Bill Nye considers that potentially will work, and they're looking into this. And so...
And part of that is in the Science Initiative building. Perhaps.
So if I may, I'll go back to explain this again. Thermo Fisher instrumentation, there's a significant amount of instruments coming in. So we are going to put some of the Science Initiative building to help campus community to access instrumentation, in addition to the fact that they have access to the equipment in high bay. Right?
Okay.
But the second contingent or second part of the instrumentation is going to go to a new space that Vice President Bill Nye is trying to identify.
A new space what?
A new space for putting the additional instrumentation.
Okay, so it'll be in the high bay, Science Initiative, and an as yet undetermined third space.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And why Science Initiative building? Because we thought that would be an additional way of enticing people to use instruments. And there's apparently high-quality space available there.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, and just to be specific, I want to be specific, just for you to know how far we've gone into this. We are going to start with at least 2 high-resolution state-of-the-art macro CT scanners in a Science Initiative building. And my intention is that with the very first, among the very first that would arrive there. And then while we work on identifying space for the rest of the equipment.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious how it sounds like a tough task to decide what goes where. I mean, you can't have people very well carrying these heavy core samples from the high bay over to the science initiative or all this oil and gas samples. How do you determine what goes where?
Senator Kingston, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. So to begin with, in the initial periods of this research, we are going to replace some of the obsolete equipment in high bay. So when we do that, that will allow us to continue our work. But then this new space that they have talked to me about, it seems that is in the is in the vicinity of high bay. So if that happens, there are other considerations they need to work on. There are people that they need to find new home for them on campus. If that works out, then that's not too far from high bay, and we will arrange this such that the people who work in that new site will have everything they need, that they don't need to carry things back and forth.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so on the obsolete equipment, is that equipment that, for example, some other undergrad science or engineering folks can use?
Certainly. My goal, I'm not going to give the goal is that to work with the university to see if we can find home for them, especially some of them, they don't need a specialized space. They are enclosed, lead lined. They just need proper power. And I'm going to try to work out to see who else on campus may have some use for them, definitely. And I think you would be pleased to know, as part of the Thermo Fisher initiative, we are going to obtain high-end software that these instrumentation need, and I'm going to negotiate with Thermo Fisher to see if I can do this such that we can issue access to everyone on campus who needs it. So then people can use the state-of-the-art image segmentation software on campus when they use this for wide range of research on campus.
And my understanding is that when Thermo Fisher came here last week.
Yes, sir.
They met with the president and had various discussions on other projects going on or potential projects at UW that they expressed a lot of interest in and for further collaboration on different entities, not just you, but other projects going on at UW.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Chairman, in agreement, and I think you would be pleased to know, in the executed agreement, we have actually put language for collaborations with others and actual dollars as well. Annually, there will be dollars directed towards collaborations across campus. So I deliberately incorporated in the entire agreement. Is attached to the agreement? Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So if I may, now I'll switch to Wyoming Gas Injection Initiative, Phase 1. The money for this was approved a couple of years ago. I'm delighted to tell you that we are in a very advanced stage of finalizing the contracts with the operators. As you may remember, we had to work on building all the documentation from scratch for this. From the very beginning, from basic NDAs all the way to data management plans for IP, how you handle IP, what are the termination clauses, everything. I'm very pleased to let you know that all of that we have crafted from scratch and is ready. NDA was signed some time ago. A contract was finalized with Dow. Dow gave the approval for it, the lawyers back and forth, and they finalized it. Then the contract went to the 4 operators, namely Continental Resources, Devon, Oxy, and Ballard Petroleum. And as of just literally half an hour ago that I had the most recent update from Continental, all 4 of them targeting to get the contract back to us with a detailed scope of work by the end of November.
Mr. Co-Chair, so this is Phase 1?
Yes, sir.
We're just now getting the paperwork for Phase 1 done?
Operators signing, the university signing it.
Okay, and so then that won't have to be redone for Phase 2?
Exactly. That's my
Or Phase 3 or Phase 4?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Now, when we switch to on Phase 2, I don't need to redo any of this. It's all built. So as an example, we are going to release the RFP or request for proposal for Phase 2 this year. To release that is ready. As a matter of fact, we have done some edits on it. We're going to give it to university administration, take a look at, release it, and then get the applications in the spring and try to grant that as well.
Did you ever think that the legal paperwork would take longer than the research itself?
But having done this with other operators and oil companies and in the past, I wasn't too surprised, particularly considering the fact that we have so many entities involved. I don't want to have a different contract with every operator, right? So you have so many people, entities involved, and it's really rather stressful to try to make sure that everyone responds on time and they don't make a bunch of changes that others don't like. So we made sure university and Dow were happy, then send it to operators. But then I want to give quite a bit of credit to operators. They have been very responsive, and I really appreciate it. So I've been promised that in November I'll get back, and if I can get them signed before the Christmas holidays would be great. So if I may highlight a few more details on that, these agreements also include detailed scope of work. So we have details there what they are going to do, and I'm getting outside parties, independent from operators, involved with our support for them, for us to do assessment of the efficacy of that gas injection. Meaning, so oil companies will do gas injection and report certain data. We want to have independent parties to review that and tell us how effective it has been. And Wyoming gas injection at phase 2, as I said, all documents ready. We have the first version of the RFP ready, request for proposal. I'm going to send that next week to university administration for review and then release it. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So there was another aspect of all of this with respect to the high bay, which was beyond oil and gas, just research on space. I mean, the pore spaces as it might relate to water and to carbon sequestration and all those subsequent phases.
Yes.
I know we're still early on, but when do you anticipate that? That's going to be more on the order of just almost pure research. When do you anticipate that's going to come on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Kingsky, you're absolutely correct. So in addition to oil and gas, Thermofusion Initiative includes work on hydrogen storage, hydrogen batteries, and hydrogen geostorage, CO2 sequestration, water resources management, and digitalization. Phase 1 of it, we decided to work on oil and gas and hydrogen because of more pressing. Phase 2 will be water resource management, CO2 sequestration, and digitalization. So as we advance oil and gas on the Thermofusion Initiative, we will do pure research on hydrogen storage. And thankfully, over the last 7 or 8 years, we have developed some key technologies there that through Thermofusion Initiative, we are going to expand so we can accelerate development of some of these, hopefully, breakthroughs in regards to storage of hydrogen in nanoporous materials, as you highlighted.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I have some more. I just don't want to.
No, please go ahead.
So then, when we spoke last, and we've spoken a couple times about you getting your budget, your chart of accounts, so that it lines up with the university's chart of accounts, and I think it's who's working on that? Is it Chad or somebody? We're trying to work on getting your budget to line up with the UW's budget and chart of accounts, and so that you can then put your requests in through the regular UW process, which you did this last time for your capital and your budget. How are we coming along so that your budget fits seamlessly into the university's budget process?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kingsky, thank you for asking that question. So all that information, after we work with you and other colleagues, have been communicated to Vice President Chidnis and Alex Keene, our CFO.
Alex Keene, okay.
Yes, sir. And I just waiting to see how that's incorporated in universities. In their hand, we have provided all the information.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mike, when does the university's budget process kick off internally?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that process for the following fiscal year, I'm trying to figure out the smartest way to explain this. So that begins anytime now as each unit prepares their request for fiscal year 26 coming up. The formal process of collecting all those, presenting it to the president, usually would occur in the March timeframe. And then the Board of Trustees holds their several days of budget meetings with all units in the university in May. And then the board, the budget committee of the board considers that. The full board votes, I believe, in June. I can confirm with VP Keen on exact dates, but so that process is approved for July 1, 2025, fiscal year 26.
So if you know, how far along are we with Alex Keen and Professor Dr. Chitnis being able to present a budget through the internal processes coming out of high bay that lines up? You know, it's hard when somebody's budget doesn't look like the budget everybody else is used to looking at.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I don't believe the issue was ever that the numbers or the data didn't line up. There just wasn't always, the timing didn't always work. If you recall the timing of the Thermo Fisher visits and the development of that proposal, it had come to be after the university's requests were made. And let me clarify one thing. As we do that internal budget, that approval for the next fiscal year for the university, that feeds into the process of developing the budget requests for exception requests that will then go to the governor and the legislature for additional funding beyond the core budget, right, the base budget. And so the Thermo Fisher opportunity arose after that list had been forwarded from the university to the governor. And so that kind of came to you all outside of our normal request process. And that's really what we're, to the extent we can, trying to marry up Dr. Peary's requests with the university's internal process. And as far as I know, we should be on track for that. There are no requests that I'm aware of that went to the governor through the normal process for an exception request for this supplemental budget year. There were none for the Dr. Peary's center. And so we don't expect any of those to be made for this next year. And moving forward, we should be aligned, save for a situation like that came up with Thermo Fisher, where we were presented with this great opportunity but it's outside that normal timing.
Okay, and then one more, Mr. Co-Chair, Dr. Peary, and perhaps Mike, if you know, do you still have a financial person at the center? And you had some requests, like you wanted to get a little bit more out of the university's budget as opposed to you having to raise so much of your own budget on your own. Yes, and in the past, you had some hesitance about submitting those, but are you coming along, talking to Dr. Chitnis and so forth about the things you'd like to see in your budget? You may not get them, but that you'd like to see in your budget, and getting those submitted through the process for consideration by the university?
Mr. Chair and Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. We have communicated all the details of what we would like to see in our budget to Vice President Chitnis and CFO Keen. In fact, my current financial person, Jordan, who replaced Mark, whom you had met, he's extremely familiar with university processes because he came from President's office, joined High Bay, and he has submitted all of it through university financial system.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Any other questions for Mr. Peary? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, given the expeditious manner you're moving through, if you would indulge moving the last item on your agenda to today, we could give a brief overview of...
Oh, by the way, Clark, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
No, Mr. Chairman, I think Dr. Peary answered those questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I did want to give a little bit of a background. This is item number 22 on your agenda, originally scheduled for 4 p.m., an interactive data visualization preview. And by way of some background, this is an outgrowth of the Data Book Subcommittee of the Joint Appropriations Committee, which convened originally 3 years ago. It included Co-Chairman Nicholas, Representative Schwartz, and several others. We have been making incremental adjustments to our data book and are pleased to give or unveil our future component of our website today. We, with the approval of Management Council, embedded funds for approximately, well, for 4 licenses for a Microsoft product that allows us to provide interactive graphics on our website. Those 4 licenses cost a few $1,000s for the biennium. Our goal is eventually to reduce our printing costs of the actual data book, which are significant. However, be assured they will be full printed copies in the January 2025 edition for this year. But our long-term goal is to make that thinner or perhaps even phase it out to only requesting legislators. We also wanted to thank the State Budget Department. Given this was new software, we leveraged their external consultant, CLA, which is charged with the management and reporting of some of our ARPA funds and uses the same software. And as part of that relationship, we're willing to spend a couple of days with LSO staff and provide training on this software. It is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Unfortunately, of the 4 licenses, Mr. DuPont departed today. And unfortunately, Mr. Hoversland will be leaving LSO's employ in mid-November. We do have 4 public-facing websites related to local governments, revenues, appropriations, and K-12 education, which Hank will walk through with you. There is, our first goal was to provide some immediate impact for members of the public, and LSO staff. Going forward, we intend to build those out incrementally, but we also have opportunities to have other websites or other internal processes, such as budget evaluation on the JAC SharePoint. So an analysis of, say, exception requests or something like that. That will not occur this year, but that is a longer-term opportunity. And we anticipate posting this publicly in the month of November at some point. 3 of the 4 websites have been updated with yesterday's October Craig materials. The K-12 section has yet to be updated, so we'll be doing that over the next few weeks. And then finally, we do anticipate going forward that this site would be updated about 3 times a year at least, in October with the release of Craig, perhaps in January with the release of Craig, and in April after the receipt of all governor's vetoes and the new appropriations data. I just wanted to kind of set the stage and provide some context and then hand it over to Mr. Hoversland unless you have any questions.
So does that mean that Hank has to come back and educate it until we're all up in snuff?
Mr. Chairman, my services are always here, so if you need it. Mr. Chairman, Hank Hoversland with LSO. Up on the screen, you'll see a mock-up of what this new site will look like. It's not live quite yet, so we don't have it on the website, but this is what it will look like. We're trying to integrate it to make it look and flow with the website pretty well. So it will be under the State Finances tab, under Data Visualization. So that's what I have pulled up here. And we'll start with the appropriations. There's just a short, on each of these, there's just a short kind of explanation of what they are. But I'll kind of walk you through some of the power that this Microsoft product has given to us. So over on the left, you will see filters that you can choose. So right now, this is historical appropriations going back to the 93-94 biennium, excluding transfers. And this is by fund type. So federal funds, general funds, and other funds. Over here, you can select just federal funds, and that will show you the growth of federal funds over time. Or if you want to, for just that, or if you want to see only state funds, you can do that and see general and other funds and see how those have contributed to the budget with the total up top, and then you can see the different portions that contribute to that total. Additionally, something very nice about this exactly is that you can when you hover over any of these bars, it will show you the exact value of those funds. So that's something that this provides. Moving on to the next.
Is that a pun off of your name, if you're hovering?
Yeah, yes, exactly, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as Don noted, a lot of this is already what's contained within the data book. And so this is a page that has the top 10 largest general fund appropriations, including all others. So on the left over here, you can see them ranked by department, and then you can hover over and show you a bit more information showing that this is the Department of Health. They have the largest general fund budget. All others is second. The University of Wyoming is third, and so on and so forth. I'll just move quickly into each of these as we do the top 10 largest appropriations by federal funds, which is by and large the Department of Health with almost half of those appropriations. Other funds, the largest is the Education School Finance, seeing over a third of those of other funds appropriations, and then all funds. So number one is all others actually, and then number two is Department of Health, School Finance, so on and so forth. This next one is historical appropriations by agency, category, and fund. So here you will see it looks very similar to what you had on that first page, but transfers are included in here.
Question, Hank?
Yep.
So when we have unique things like CARES Act dollars or ARPA dollars come in, will they be reflected solely as federal dollars, or will they be broke out as a unique?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding, and Representative Larson, and Elizabeth can correct me if I'm wrong, is that I know that the ARPA dollars that we received, that the state received, were categorized as other funds, but I'm not sure how the CARES Act.
Mr. Chairman, Elizabeth Martineau with LSO. The CARES Act funds are not included.
Mr. Chairman, the CARES Act funds are not included, and the reason for that is you'll recall this was the May 2020 special session, and you did not appropriate those by specificity. You gave the governor or the executive branch broad discretion over business, private, health response. So those are not included. The ARPA funds are included, as Hank indicated, as other funds.
Yeah, and I guess my question wasn't so much about those particular ones specifically, but moving forward as we see unique funds, or that just trying to figure out what category they might, so that you could pick them out, you know, and see the influences was my question.
And Mr. Chairman, again, Elizabeth Martineau, that typically depends on your designation within the budget bill. So if you, for example, with the ARPA funds that we had in the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health, those are called out and defined separately as ARPA funds for that specific kind of set. So you have that choice as well. If you wanted to track IIJA funds or other funds in that regard, that's to your discretion.
So that, yeah, the IIJA is probably the next big ones, because over 5 years, it's what, 500, 600 million for YDOT. And how are those be keyed?
Mr. Chairman, very little of the IIJA funds are in your budget, meaning they're in YDOT's capital construction budget, or they are B11 when an agency is successful on a competitive grant. So most of that IIJA does not flow through a legislative appropriation, and all of our graphics are limited to what the legislature does.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Fair enough, but yet, in our conversation as a whole, we'll know that there's these IIJA funds out there, DEQ, YDOT, you know, various. So is there or will there be a mechanism there then for us to look over and say, for example, B11, so they're B11, they're now in the budget. We've got authority there. So will there be a mechanism or some way to track those? Or?
Not at this time. I think at some point, we have the opportunity to increase the capacity of our B11 system, and we've looked at a variety of options to do that. But right now, it is a very paper-intensive and executive branch process only.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have a B11 NAFR process that we're into upgrading, but when we got impacted by CARES and the pandemic, other priorities came, budget reductions and et cetera. So the budget department will do that. But right now, if you want to have an understanding, and maybe we could work with LSO on it, but you can go to the ARPA compliance portal and you can see where those federal funds are coming and who's getting those for IIJA or BEAD, et cetera. It's just not appropriated. It's movement of funds
Just
through
follow up,
exercise of the feds.
And my concern really isn't what you've got populated now. I just really like what I'm seeing, and am just looking down the road and saying, is there the potential or the opportunity to do this? So I'm not implying that we've missed the boat anywhere. I think this is really cool stuff, and it would be wonderful to illustrate at the end of a budget session what, you know, what we spent and what we've done, and there's the impact of B11s and so on. So that was the only reason I brought it up.
And in a, you know, in a more generic fashion, you know, we've gone, our budget has grown up to 10 billion, but a lot of that, frankly, over the past 4 or 5 years has been federal government assistance in one fashion or another. And so in terms of the long-term scenario, it'll be interesting to see where we come down and how that pans out in our future budgets, because obviously those funds are going to run out. And so graphically, I think, and dollar-wise, that's just something that it'd be nice to have a handle on it, to articulate and to explain as part of the process. But this is pretty cool.
Very cool.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I think, and Don alluded to it, I think there's a lot more capabilities that we were just getting our handle on at this interim. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Elizabeth, Taylor DuPont, and Matt Wilmarth for their work on a lot of these graphics. I think something that we can do going forward, and I have one that we can do, is do a pie chart of percentage by fund type. So if you do federal funds, general funds, other funds, to show that over the biennia. And another thing that going into the future, we don't want to make any promises right now, but is looking at those other funds and being able to see which ones those are. And I think we have some of those capabilities. And yeah, well, I don't want to speak for them right now. As he said, I'll be leaving here in a week or so, so I'm not going to speak for them on that.
This is a perfect time to do it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for this presentation. I'm excited about the continued enhancement of providing this information to the public, as well as for our usage. And it is used. I actually screenshot out of the data book and use it in my PowerPoint presentations that I give to the community when I explain what we do in the budget. And my favorite thing to point out, just for this committee, is that when I came in 17, right, my first task as a brand new legislator was to cut the budget by $1.5 billion as a result of revenue declines. And so understanding just how this committee has been so responsive to the dynamic needs of the state of Wyoming based on revenue shortfalls and revenue gains, and how that number has changed over time, both up and down. And that's part of this process. But it's something I like to share with the public as well. So the work that has gone into this, which is no doubt immense to get this kind of a polished product, is really used and is very valuable. I just want you to know that it's very much appreciated. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, thank you. And as Don indicated early on, this is for members' use and for the public. And so we'd encourage them, once it's up and running on the website, to use it as much as they can. Something I would note about this visualization up there, if there's no further questions at this time, is that you'll see different numbers from this one, from the first one, and that is because transfers are included in this graphic. As noted by the title, it does not exclude transfers. So you can go in and see how those unselect and go into transfers and see how those have changed over time. As you can see, there's been up and down years and all of that good stuff. Another nice thing about this graphic, Mr. Chairman, is if you click on the in between or hover over in between those, you can see the growth from year over year. We haven't found a way to do it over the whole time span, but what you can see is the percentage change year over year. And so that's a nice feature of this graphic. And then the other thing that I would point out about this is you can go by agency. So if you want to look at Department of A&I was just here, so you can look at them and see what their budget has looked like over time. That shows right there. Moving on, Mr. Chairman, this is by category, and again, this gets a little bit hard to read, but as I said, you can hover over and see what each category gets. So you have higher education, community colleges, UW, and the Higher Education Authority. So there's a lot that goes into education, but then the rest are defined by agency. And if you click over here, it will highlight, but if you just want to see one category, so if you want to see what general government has done, if it'll work. Maybe not right now, but we'll look at that. You can choose your category though. The next one is positions, and so it's the same kind of idea. And I would note on this one,
It froze up on us.
Maybe time stopped for everyone except us.
I think so. We lost them.
That's interesting. So it's not you and me, it's them.
Yeah.
This data visualization tool seems really good.
Yeah, this will be great. Nope. I can't activate it.
Well, I guess we just stay tuned.
It says we're still on YouTube. I'll look and check there.
So Mike, I guess we can just conduct the meeting ourselves.
Yeah, they can hear us. Everybody online can hear us because Corin Schmidt, hi, Corin. Other people are chiming in saying they can hear us, but nobody else.
Well, Mike, maybe you and I can just vote on all the pending legislation and be done for the day.
That's a big 10-4. I'm just pass all the gaming bills in mass. Just one big blanket. Go. Send them on. Oh. As Director Schmidt says hello.
Ironic that this occurred during a presentation about transparency.
Well, at least we get it warts and all. That's good.
Maybe the committee just exceeded its transparency threshold for the day.
I'm not going to touch that. Oh, they're trying something. Hmm. Yeah, I'm going to. We're taking it, if people out there can hear me, we're taking a 10-minute break to try to resolve the issue. Just got word.
take us back to your screen.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, as I was saying, you'll see this, there was a big decrease from the 95-96 biennium to the 97-98. And AWACS are included on that. This one, the reason for in that sharp decline is because on this one, you can go by agency. And so I will show you where that decline comes in Section 67, the University of Wyoming, which has 0 after that. So that was the reason for that decline, and that's a nice little, shows the change, and you can go by agency on this one. So that closes it up for appropriations. Just a few slides over here on revenues. So this is actual revenues for the general fund and budget reserve account by revenue source. And you can go all the way back to 1993 the same way.
So, Mr. Chairman, Hank, I can't see that sort of, or revenue source, or are you talking mineral sales tax, and are you including sales or federal funds in there as well?
Mr. Chairman, Don, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, that first tab was appropriations, which is kind of how you think about the budget. The second tab is how you see it in Craig. So you have streams of revenue like severance taxes, federal mineral royalties, sales and use taxes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yeah, when it's on your screen, you'll be able to see better. But that far left column is sales and use taxes. So that's the #1 revenue source for the general fund and budget reserve account. The blue is for the budget reserve account. The tannish color is for the general fund. #2 over there is income on the permanent mineral trust fund, and then severance taxes, FMRs, pooled income, so on and so forth. Then you can move.
Mr. Chairman, on all these, and just for my own curiosity, why is 93 the farthest you go back?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, that, we just kind of chose that because we had sound data at that far back, and I believe it was that K-12 was?
Mr. Chairman, it's 30 years, so it was an even number. We do have Craig data back to 1980. We do not have appropriations data back to 1980. We only have appropriations data back to the 1990s. And we have K-12 data, which is solid, back to 2000. So it's really a availability of data. So on revenues, and we thought about this, and we can modify it based upon legislative preference. We wanted to be the same for everything, so that's why we picked 93. But if there is interest, even on the JAC SharePoint, to say, hey, we want this, everything you have, we'll go back another 17 years or something and show you the full amount.
Mr. Chairman, no need for me. I was just curious how that date was chosen, so thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, moving on, you can then go by revenue source. So this just shows it graphically by revenue source. So if you just want to see FMRs and COLIS bonuses, that would be that, sales and use tax, the growth of that, or severance taxes. And then this one, Representative Larson, I think you talked a bit, this one breaks it out by the mineral source for severance taxes. So you can see that. So natural gas's growth or something along those. Then, oh, that's the same account. Then you can go to the forecast. So this just shows, this is updated as Don noted with the Craig that was released yesterday. So this is for assessed value out to 2030. So the tan bars are forecasts, while the blue is actuals. And that includes assessed values. So that's it for revenues. If there's no questions, I can move quickly on to school finance. Oh.
Thank you. This is so interesting. Is there a way to visualize maybe this is a two-part question, like how much we put into savings and then how much interest is generated off of that savings? Thank you.
Yep, so Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, couple ways you can do that. So interest generated on savings, we can go into the general fund and budget reserve account. So you can see this the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund income. You can go back to years. The other way you can do it is, I believe this slide would have, oh, it does not have it. Apologies. So you can see that for each year. Where you put it into savings, that would be on that first tab, the appropriations. So I would go to agency appropriations because this has transfers. And you would go to the category and select just transfers. So that was that one I showed you. It's not going to show you exactly where they go, but it will show how much has been transferred. And this is into many funds, so this could be into the common school account within the permanent land fund, into the PMTF, or other things. I think there was transfers to the Cultural Resources Trust Fund, Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund. So the definition of transfers, and Don can correct me if I'm wrong, is more on the permanent savings accounts. There are no further questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll move on to school finance and would note that actually there are some updates to this that are inclusive of the October CRAG. So this just shows enrollment by district, and then you can select, so say for Chairman Kinski, his Sheridan County districts, he can see enrollment in just Sheridan number 1 or select all 3 to see the change in enrollment over time. The next one shows the total school foundation program funding as compared to the per pupil funding and that growth over time. And again, if you hover over, you can see the actual numbers for each of these. The next slide, again, is similar to that first one. It's foundation program funding by school district. So for you, Representative Sherwood, Albany 1, you can see that over time on that and the exact amount. And then this shows on the far left is this shows per pupil school foundation program funding by school district, and it goes from highest to lowest. So the far left is the highest, which is Sheridan number 3 in Arvada Claremont, and then down to Weston number 7, which is in Upton. And I believe the difference for that, Mr. Chairman, just if there's a question that arises, Weston 7 is so low because of online enrollment. And they're both cats. Yeah, that too, yes. This next one shows it by school year, so you have to select just one county. So this just starts on Albany number 1, so it's just a different graphic showing of that same data. And then this is that mirror funding that you see, so state share versus local share. You can see, again, hovering over what those are and the percentages when you hover. And you can see that the state share has grown over the past couple of years. This then goes into local revenues by school district for the 25, the local property taxes, motor vehicle taxes, fines and forfeitures, and then others. And you can choose your favorite district. So where we are right now, you can show Laramie 1's local revenues by that. Again, this is then school foundation and school capital construction account revenues, historic back to 2001, 2002. As you see in 2023, 2024, the school capital construction account falls off because that is when it consolidated with the public school foundation program account. And up here, you can choose your revenue source. This one is capital construction appropriations by category. And then the final one on K-12 finances is major maintenance funding by school district back to 2000. So that clears it out for school finance. And then the final one we have is local governments. So This one shows the annual distribution. So this is the 2025 distribution that local governments received. This first one is for counties. So my home county, Natrona County, you can hover over and see that it got 4.1 million in that distribution, and it's scaled by color. Albany got 2.7, Laramie 3.3, and Fremont was 1.7. And then you can go into cities and towns. And Mr. Chairman, on this, up in the right-hand corner, you can choose your county. So again, for Chairman Kinski, you can go into Sheridan County and see what the municipalities in that county received for the last year, or if you want to add Johnson in there as well, you can see that. So, Mr. Chairman, that's it for me if there are no further questions.
Well done. You sure you want to go? You can finish this.
Mr. Chairman, I believe it's pretty well finished for now, and it should be on the website here soon, so we're pretty excited for the public to be able to use this.
You haven't seen the rest of the list. Okay, any other questions for Hank?
Where do we find that on the website?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, this is not up yet, so this is just a test link, but it will be under state finances, and then there's going to be a bottom tab down here called data visualizations. So it'll be right there. And when it does go live, we can send an email to all members to let them know and send them the links to that.
Okay, any other public comment for the day, for the morning? Thanks, Hank, appreciate it. So committee, we're going to come back at 12:30. We had kind of rearranged for the gaming folks to come back up. Our intent is to move kind of as quickly as possible, so people can get on the road. We've got 7 bills to run through. And there was a couple proposed amendments that we received via email this morning for some of those bills.
Mr. Chairman, are we going to have copies of those amendments? Karen, have you seen them?
Yes, sir, we'll have copies.
Thank you.
And just for the edification of the committee, so your working group has worked these bills fairly hard. And so we're not going to probably spend a whole lot of time on them. And as you may recall, Management Council has asked us being the Appropriations Committee, to basically take the lead on this, on the overseeing the Gaming Commission. So it's our assigned duty to do this, and this is kind of our first run at of trying to get a grips on the Gaming Commission and its rapid growth, and assessing what needs to happen in the future with it. And that's kind of the genesis of a lot of the bills that you will be seeing this afternoon. So with that, we'll stand in recess till 12:30.